Today we have Deniz Yilmaz from the Sky Frontier Foundation.
And obviously, I think Sky is unique because it's one of the only decentralized stablecoins. If we do a code audit and it returns some serious issues, then we don't just fix them and ship it, right? We actually we pull the brake and we wonder what went wrong. How did this slip past the usual internal reviews?
Sky's code base is a little bit different, where you have very interesting names, like maybe a deposit will be called Kick or something.
So that by understanding the names, you can already kind of understand what it does. Ultimately, we're going to run into bottlenecks because the process is very involved, and the amount of people that have the context and that are trusted to do the work is limited, and we're already pretty much at their limits.
Cool. All right. Welcome to the Web3 Security Podcast. Today we have Deniz Yilmaz from the Sky Frontier Foundation. Deniz is the CTO of the Sky Frontier Foundation. And if you're not familiar with Sky, Sky is one of the biggest protocols in the world, formerly known as MakerDAO. Sky's stablecoin USDS, formerly known as DAI, is one of the biggest stablecoins in the world, the largest decentralized stablecoin in the world, and it's the third biggest stablecoin in the world, only behind USDC and Tether. Is that all correct?
You got your facts straight, Jack.
All right, nice. Well, great to have you here, Deniz. Thanks for joining. And yeah, let's just kick right off into your background. So how does someone become the CTO of an organization like this? What were your early, where did you grow up? What were your early interactions with computers, with that sort of thing?
Well, first off, thanks for having me. Yeah, let's start there. I've had a bit of a weird journey, and I think that's pretty typical for crypto because it's quite a new industry, right? And it's very high context, I would say. So yeah, I've had my background is in engineering management, but yeah, I ended up not really pursuing that field as much because when I just got out of college, I bumped into crypto, and back then I was still really looking for something to be interested in and excited about, and this immediately grabbed my attention. And it was really good timing because I just moved to Amsterdam at that time, and I started becoming really interested in the startup space, and I got very excited about that. And I felt like I wanted to work in tech, work for startups. So back then, Amsterdam had a really nice meetup community. So multiple times a week, I would go to meetups and just learn about tech startups in general. And then of course, when I learned about crypto, I went to crypto meetups, right? And I ended up learning or getting to know the local scene, but also just having an outlet for that newfound obsession. So I started off in that sense as a crypto user. I also started to invest a little, ended up just only losing money on it. But in that journey, I bumped into also some entrepreneurs that were building businesses related to blockchain and crypto. And obviously back then, this was 2017, there weren't a lot of people working in this space, right? And you weren't really sure what you were looking for in terms of background. There were no majors in blockchain or something, right? So you were just looking for the right soft skills, I think mostly, and context when it comes to crypto. So I landed a job at a very early stage startup in Amsterdam. They were doing mostly consulting for enterprise, right? So they were basically helping businesses understand what blockchain is and how they can use it and how they can integrate it. And that was a lot of fun because, it was just a good fit for that era, right? 2017, 18. People were just very excited about blockchain and just trying to slap it on everything.
Right.
And from there on, I started also, getting familiar with managing development teams, overseeing projects, cross-functionally. Was a lot of fun. Definitely learned the ropes there, but during those years, I also started getting more and more obsessed with crypto, but also finding a little bit more clarity where with regards to where the real use cases are. Obviously, DeFi Summer happened, right? And yeah, I was totally obsessed there, and also very convinced that was like really the one thing that truly made sense and that was worth to pursue. So that's when I also left that prior like blockchain or enterprise blockchain space, because frankly, there was a lot of bullshitting there, like just like looking for use cases and doing all these like pilots on permission chains. And yeah, at one point I felt like it was more about the press releases than actually like getting your hands dirty and learning about how the tech works.
Right.
So yeah, I made the jump to DeFi, and then at one point I landed a job at MakerDAO, and from there on I really got to make a few jumps in terms of the role that I was playing. So yeah, very unorthodox path, but when you talk to other people working in crypto, usually you get similar stories, because it's a pretty new industry still.
Yeah. A lot of unorthodox paths. Okay, cool. So let me think. What was the catalyst? Sounds like DeFi Summer, and then how did you land on MakerDAO? It was called MakerDAO then, Sky. How did you land on Sky in terms of like, this is one of the places I want to apply to? Was there like a job application open as well, or?
My first job in DeFi was with a very early stage protocol that was actually just launched, and it was still figuring out its audience and its like core product. And that was a lot of fun, but then that didn't really work out. And I figured, okay, I want to work for a more established company that already has a direction and already has like a user base and distribution. And I landed my first job at Maker pretty by chance. There was this one guy in my network I used to work with, and he just reached out to me asking if I had anything going on. And that's how I basically got hired into one of the teams. It was really fun because MakerDAO back then was, if you knew crypto and DeFi, you knew MakerDAO, right? You knew DAI, you probably were using like the vaults and stuff. I definitely was a user. So there was already a lot of like sentiment around the project. And it was very interesting because it was just around the time where the Maker Foundation got fully dissolved, and you just had like a bunch of independent teams that were trying to figure it out together and interface with on-chain governance. So that in itself was like a new intellectual rabbit hole for me to get lost in, right? DAO governance and working fully remote across all these independent teams. So that's why I went for it. It just seemed very compelling and interesting.
Yeah. Did you have any idea it was going to be such a, DAO focused decentralized role, or were you just like, oh, it's MakerDAO, it's Sky, that's something that I want to be a part of?
Yeah, I definitely had no clue. Like I was hired for a PM role.
Okay.
I figured I'm just going to do PM work, but then I learned that if you join a project like that, that's so much in flux and figuring out how to organize itself, right? As an organization, you're naturally going to get involved in that process. And that's actually the thing that I also am good at. That's what I've learned, right? That, I'm good at participating in those kind of challenges across various teams, across various functions. And it's also one of the reasons I am in the current role that I am in.
Yeah. Okay. And so when you started out there, you said you're in a PM role. Is that project or product manager?
So my first job at Maker was a product manager role, and I was mostly, or actually only, focused on the front end app that people use to interact with its governance system. Right. So if you are an MKR token holder, I'm saying MKR because back then it was still MKR.
Yeah.
You would use this website to follow what's going on and also participate and vote and delegate. And there's this one team that built it and designed it and actually still maintains it. And that's where I started. Got it.
Okay. And what were some of the, so much has changed at Sky over that time period. And obviously a lot has changed for you in terms of your role, I'm sure. What were some of like the milestones or some of the things that happened that you were a part of while all those changes were going on?
It's a good question. I would say if I zoom all the way out, I've been now already part of a few cycles where it's been really just about like figuring out how to organize itself, right, as an organization. Because when I joined in 2021, there was this real push for decentralization. The foundation just got dissolved. And there was also a lot of optimism there. But then the following 2 years, I think that optimism broke down because we could all tell that like a fully decentralized organization with full decentralized governance, it could work for certain things, but there's also a lot of things that it cannot handle, right? For example, you could tell there was not a vision, right? There was no real strategy. People were just like micromanaging and fighting for more budget and trying to grow their own teams and coming up with additional work without really having someone or something set like a North Star and make sure that the work that's being done aligns with a broader strategy. So I think the cycles I've been part of in the organization have really been about, okay, how can we organize ourselves better, right? Without compromising on the fact that we still want to have decentralized governance and checks and balances. And yeah.
Got it. Okay. And, you know, as you've kind of moved into the role today, what is your role today and where do you spend most of your time? What do you spend most of your time on?
Yeah, so now I'm the CTO of the Sky Frontier Foundation, which is a relatively new entity as part of the ecosystem that just tries to drive the workforce and make sure that the work happens. And yeah, basically I lead all of the technical teams and I'm basically interfacing between strategy and the technical realities, right, of managing and running a decentralized stablecoin protocol. So in that sense, most of my time is spent on calls. Basically, yeah, that's no surprise, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So just coordinating with all the teams across all the projects and just being a filter, I guess, between all that stuff that's going on when it comes to the day-to-day and then the strategy team. And that's in both ways, right? If there's anything that needs to be implemented or changed, then I am usually the one to drive that. But also the other way around, there's a lot of noise happening in the day-to-day work, but there's definitely signal in there that it's my responsibility to catch that and to escalate and to bring it to the right people. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun in that sense, being basically working with everyone, hearing everything, and just being like the high context person that tries to spot the signal from the noise, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. As we think about MakerDAO and Sky, how would you give people a refresher of, okay, if I was familiar with MakerDAO, if I was familiar with DAI, how did those things turn into, you know, Sky and USDS and Grove and Spark? Can you give people a refresher on kind of what the components are?
For sure, yeah. That's a good question. I've heard that a lot. Even people that knew about Maker, they're kind of lost in terms of what's happened since then. And it's only been a little over a year now, so it's still early. But I think the main thing that happened is there was this massive rebrand into Sky and into USDS. The main reason is that even though Maker and DAI had good like brand awareness within the crypto space, it just was not intuitive for new users, right? There was no like coherence between the two. But also DAI, like it's not apparent that it's a US dollar pegged stablecoin, right? So this rebrand, it was really an investment into making sure that we have a more intuitive and coherent brand before like stablecoins actually scale to the rest of the world. That's been pretty successful. I can already tell within the crypto space that Sky as a brand is there. It's sticky. Mm-hmm. But also just from my own experiences talking with non-crypto natives, it's just a lot easier to explain. So yeah, that's been great. And then you mentioned Spark and Grove. Definitely the biggest development is that we now have these, we call them stars, but I think they're more easily understood as subdaos. And the reason why we have those is because there's a lot of operational realities when it comes to having a decentralized stablecoin protocol, right? It's over collateralized. It has a diversified basket of collateral that needs to be constantly managed and onboarded, offboarded. And it's just not, it has proven to be not feasible to manage that with like a fully decentralized organization. So with this new framework, we basically empower these stars to do that autonomously, right? So they are basically getting a credit line from Sky Core, and they can allocate it into various types of collateral. You can already tell there's some like specialization happening, where, for example, the first star that we've launched, Spark, being very much like a EVM DeFi specialist. Mm-hmm. And then Grove, they have a lot of roots in like TradFi and RWA. And I think so far it's been really cool because you can tell these teams are very, they can move a lot faster because they're less bogged down by like the team size and all the processes. But still they are very aligned with Sky Core because of the way that their own token and their own like, their own financials are being controlled and tied to Sky Core. So it's basically, I would say, incentive engineering and incentive alignment that makes sure that we can have these smaller, more nimble subdaos do a lot of the work when it comes to maintaining that pool of collateral that is generating a yield for stablecoin holders, while still making sure that they have skin in the game and need to comply with all the requirements over at Sky Core.
Yeah, awesome. And the way that I think of Sky is one of the most innovative and kind of pushing DAOs and decentralization forward the most. I know I watched a talk that you gave in, I think, 2022, where you were talking about DAOs and kind of how we can improve DAOs. What have you learned over those, 3 or 4 years, whatever it is now, in terms of how to make DAOs workable?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's been, in a way, very humbling to be part of that process because, when I joined again, I was also very optimistic and very excited about DAOs and fully decentralized. But I think again, we've just learned that in practice it doesn't work, right? Because if everything is decentralized, usually you end up with like an organization that just tries to grow and grow and grow and get more budget, more people, more projects. And there also needs to be someone or something that is that is cutting the fat, right? And that makes sure that there is a coherent strategy. And usually you cannot expect the token holders or the shareholders, right? The token holders to be that force. And that's something we've tried, right? There's been many like delegates over at MakerDAO that have really tried to do their best. But the reality is that the workforce, they are the ones that have all the context. They actually get paid to spend their time on it, right? So it just, there was this dynamic where the delegates could not really prevent the DAO from just growing and expanding into like unnecessary projects and work. So if I were to summarize, I think DAOs, 2025, 2026, it's really all about like making sure decentralization is protected and upheld as a principle, especially where it matters the most. And then just making sure that it's really about checks and balances. But making sure, though, that, for example, managing work, managing budgets, that is like delegated to entities, where, of course, the DAO still has a say over those budgets, those resources, the leadership, but not that every single decision needs to be managed by decentralized governance. Because it's also, if you think about it, if you own stock in Google, you're not going to be voting on, I don't know, whether this engineer gets a raise or whether this particular team can work on this project, right? That's not realistic. And it sounds really like common sense when you put it like that, but I think that's a lesson we've had to learn collectively within crypto, especially DAOs.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Why do you think Sky has been such a force? Why has it been such a focus at Sky to, push towards decentralization? Like, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, good question. For me, decentralization, it's definitely like the highest principle to uphold, even though it continuously evolves. Yeah, I think especially when you're dealing with DeFi, you're dealing with other people's money, and just inherently you do not want to have these highly centralized points of failure where a single multisig can access the whole thing. Right? That's an obvious one, but just in general, also making sure that when it comes to the development cycle, for example, there's not just one engineer or one engineering team that can push code on the blockchain, right? You need to have these checks and balances, and ideally, as much as possible, happens out in the open. And also making sure that not only everything is transparent and out in the open, but also making sure that it's practically verifiable, right? So making sure that there are people that also have the means to do those checks, and potentially are even incentivized to do so. That's, I think, the principle we have to uphold as an industry, because you naturally end up with a system that has more checks and balances, so it's less prone to failure. But I think also, realistically, it's easier to build, right? Because if you're building a DeFi protocol and it's custodial, right? So the people working on it have access to the funds. I mean, I don't know how people can even live with that responsibility, right? It's in a way, it makes things a lot harder also as a builder. So that's why I think Sky has always been like a decentralized protocol in that sense. And even though the way that materialized, it has been evolving to also make things, to keep it moving forward and making sure it doesn't bog down into this process that I mentioned earlier. But
Yeah, makes sense. What are some of the kind of security related learnings you've had in terms of having these different kind of entities interact with each other? What are some of the, I don't know, standards you've put in place or software or something to kind of, be one of these teams that is able to effectively work with these different organizations as one?
It's a good question. So when I grew into this role, I also had to understand how that works over at Sky, because it's definitely a project that I think has a very good track record in terms of security. There's never been like a major exploit, and it's been around for a long time, right? It's really one of the oldest DeFi protocols.
Right.
But even apart from that, now that I'm also observing like the day-to-day, even like the code audits usually returns 0 issues, right? So there's something out there that's
extremely rare.
I know, yeah. You you of all people know that, right? So and it really comes down to there's just the people that work on this project, especially the engineers that are closest to the core. They have just an incredible set of principles and processes in regards to how they work, and it's something that it's been really my main challenge to try and scale that to the rest of the organization and try to solidify it and document it. So it really starts with that, just having really good, really senior engineers that have a lot of context and understand how all the nooks and crannies of the protocol works. That is definitely the first thing. The second thing is making sure that their process is like really bulletproof and that they take it really seriously, right? So even though sometimes you're under time pressure to deliver, right? To deliver against business needs, you can never compromise on thoroughness. So making sure that especially the internal code reviews are really solid. And then making sure that the third step, which is code audits, that you don't really rely on that during the development cycle, right? That's really just like a last stand. And over at Sky, if we do a code audit and it returns some serious issues, then we don't just fix them and ship it, right? We actually we pull the brake and we wonder what went wrong. How did this slip past the usual internal reviews? Then, of course, on top of that, when it comes to audits, we are very picky with regards to who we work with. So we want to work only with the best auditors that have actually also worked with us for a long time. So they've built up all this context with the protocol, given that it's quite an old and elaborate, complicated system. And then even if you're at that stage, then you still have the on-chain governance system that you need to go through. And that's another like crazy watertight security castle almost. And the reason is because of the fact that Sky is non-custodial, it's fully decentralized. Every code change you need to go through this on-chain governance process, and you need to get people to vote on it, and you need to write or code what we call a spell, which is like this on-chain payload that once it passes the governance system, it executes and it changes these parameters on-chain. Those also get reviewed very thoroughly. So there's just like, it starts all the way within these like engineering teams and the way that they work. And then we have all these like processes that, act as extra protection barriers, basically.
Yeah. Okay. There's some really interesting things in there. Definitely want to dig deeper on spells and your process there. But most teams really struggle, with audits, where there's a lot of issues that are found in the audit sometimes, and it's really difficult to figure out how to prevent that. What do you think you do well? What do you think the team does well that's maybe different in those early pre-audit steps, and what do those steps look like?
Yeah, it's it may sound very simple, but it's really just making sure that the audits are not considered to be like a help during the development process. It's really like the last stand, and you need to make sure that when you're writing code, you need to be very deliberate about what you're doing, but also be very high context, right? So try to already consider how can this create like unintended interactions with stuff that's not directly related, but indirectly related, right? The protocol itself, it's pretty complicated. It has a pretty big surface area. So you want to already consider that when you're designing a new module. But it's also, I think, a matter of game theory, or at least having that thinking as being an engineer. I can tell that the Sky core devs, they're really good at that, where they don't only consider like, how can I make sure that the code does not contain any bugs, but also considering like, how could a bad actor, even internal to Sky, right? How could this be misused? And that's something that I'm particularly proud of, is that not only is the code quality really good, like based on these audit results, but also just in general, like they haven't found ways to exploit the code or find creative ways to make the system perform in weird ways. That again sounds very easy, and we've also learned that it's very difficult to scale. So as you mentioned, right, we're now onboarding all these additional teams. That also means more engineers that are a little further away from the core. And it's like the results there have been mixed, right? It's not been like this perfect track record that we're used to. But that's okay, because we still have all these like barriers in place, and we caught all of that. And we're actively building up this like security framework, so that when a new engineer joins one of these subdaos, they have an onboarding, they have a clear like write-up in terms of requirements and principles and practices that they can learn from. And the good news is, while we are figuring out all of that, there's also just like the audit landscape that is evolving, right? There's now these like LLM powered auditing tools that have proven to be very, very powerful. And also the auditing firms that we work with, including Sherlock, by the way, they're also just becoming better and better. In that sense, it's been it's not only been like a learning process internal to Sky, but also just evolving with the space in general.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess part of the, maybe it's part of your job to kind of make sure some of those teams are having a similar level of scrutiny on the code they're writing. How do you think about instilling that culture as you grow and as you expand?
Yeah, it's obviously one of the most important things, especially when you're working in DeFi. But it's definitely challenging, right? Because in a lot of cases, it's also just a matter of context and experience, right? So even though you have a very good new engineer and you can give him a decent onboarding, ideally you have this person just build up hands-on experience with the protocol and with the processes, and ultimately that just takes time, right? One example is the teams that are involved in Spellcrafting. When they hire a new engineer, they usually take like half a year to just have that person learn the ropes, and we don't trust that person until then, right? And that's really because, again, if you're involved in this kind of work, you just need to understand how the whole thing works, the whole protocol works. And if you're writing a spell that's supposed to achieve a certain outcome, you have to understand how the rest of the system works in order to make sure that it's not causing these like unintentional interactions with the protocol. So yeah, that's been a huge challenge, making sure that we also just don't rush, right? And we make sure that we take the time to have these people build up exposure to the processes and also the protocol itself. And in the meantime, just lean into external parties, especially auditing firms, to make sure that we still have capacity to execute.
Right. And let's talk about, you mentioned Spellcrafting. MakerDAO has Sky has a little bit of a different system when it comes to, I guess, implementing the code once it's written. Not only do you have to write the code and make sure it's secure, then there's this process. Can you talk a little bit more about Spellcrafting and how you guys approach it?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll briefly explain how the governance system works. So we have this thing called Atlas. It's quite difficult to explain, but it's basically like a system data set that encompasses all the processes and all the rules and all the parameters as well, related to how the protocol and how the organization works. And every time there is a proposed change to the Atlas, right, to update certain values or to implement a process, then it needs to be voted on. And we have a polling system where Sky holders can participate in governance polls. That happens pretty much every week.
Wow.
And then there is another cadence, what we call Spellcrafting indeed. Every 2 weeks, there is an executive vote. And that's basically like another voting event that happens that is tied to a spell. And basically what that does is it implements stuff on chain, right? So if you want to make any changes to the protocol, you need to go through this process. And then again, Sky token holders, they need to vote on it. And the changes cannot happen until the majority has voted it through. Or in this case, not the majority, but there's like a quorum in terms of like voting weight. And even if this executive vote has passed, right, it has met this quorum, then there's still like a governance delay before that spell can be executed, which means that someone can call a function on that contract, which then actually causes all the parameter changes to occur. Ultimately, spells basically get root access to the entire protocol. So it's a very scary thing to do, right? It's definitely one of the strong suits of Sky that also, I think, has contributed to the fact that it hasn't been exploited and it has a really good track record, is because you cannot just arbitrarily ship code and mess with the protocol. You have to go through this bi-weekly cadence where all the token holders are also participating, and there's a lot of scrutiny involved there. But yeah, when you're having a team write a spell, you need to make sure that that team is like really good and has a lot of context, because again, getting root access to the whole thing. So seemingly a spell is really easy, right? Because it's just a matter of changing some parameters, onboarding some stuff. But then, in how you achieve those outcomes, you need to make sure that you're not causing unwanted interactions with the rest of the protocol, or maybe creating some attack surface that could be exploited further down the road. And especially with spells, I think the big danger is always that even though it's not something, you're not creating a vulnerability right away, but you can gradually inject code into the protocol that after a couple of spells or after a certain amount of time or in certain conditions, suddenly there is this new attack surface that can be exploited. So that's why spellcrafting, it's a very high context, high trust process with a lot of scrutiny. We also have multiple teams that that take turns and that also review each other. And there's a very thorough process in terms of making sure that the review process is very structured and is well documented. And that's basically spellcrafting in a nutshell.
Wow. Yeah, that's a a very involved process and very, important to the system to get it right. Okay, so you've talked about kind of the engineers and their back, having deep context on the code, doing pretty deep internal reviews, having these systems for kind of governance or token holders being involved in the spells. What else do you think are interesting kind of security measures that Sky takes that maybe people from the outside wouldn't know about or that most protocols might not take?
Yeah, I would say it's related to how the governance system works. What I really like is that there's many there's different stakeholder groups that all watch each other in a way, and they're all incentivized to do so. And there's also penalties for missing things. So I think the scrutiny and the checks and balances amplified by positive and negative incentives, that starts all the way at the beginning of the process before development teams even start working, right? So making sure that the changes to parameters or the actions that ultimately need to be created in code, that they're allowed, that they make sense. That is pretty elaborate. So there's a pretty big lead time, and also the governance operations process is pretty bespoke. And I think that's also very important because that's where you can also already catch a lot of malicious behavior.
Yeah, makes sense. I have a question for you on the Sky code base. So when most teams are writing Solidity code and they have a deposit function, they'll call it deposit. Sky's code base is a little bit different, where you have very interesting names, like maybe deposit will be called kick or something. What's the backstory behind that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I obviously wasn't around when the original protocol was designed, but obviously I do know a little bit of lore in that context. Yeah, first off, I agree. It's quite it's interesting, right? You don't see it in other projects. I think the intention back then was to just have have a set of making sure that the functions are coherent in a way, so that by understanding the names, you can already kind of understand what it does and how they relate to other functions in the system. So this actually ended up being named informally as Daianese back when we still had Dai. And it's there's people that love it. There's people that hate it. What I can tell from my experience is that it helped, especially non-technical stakeholders. Basically you give them a language to express what they mean, right? So I've, for example, seen there was this delegate back in the MakerDAO days. He was called Flip Flap Flop, related to the flip, flap, or flop auctions in the MCD protocol. But then there's also this notion of barking, which is basically that allows for a position to be liquidated. I don't know. It's quite at first glance it's a little weird, but then if you're part of the ecosystem, it actually ends up being pretty useful because you can kind of understand like what it means and how it relates to other functions, and it just gives you like a good language also for non-technical stakeholders to explain what they mean. That having said, though, if the core devs would have the chance to completely re-architect the system, I'm not sure if they would do the same. But because the learning curve, it is definitely steep, and we've also seen that cause issues with auditors and with new hires, and
Yeah. That's another interesting topic. Is I know you have a lot of devs. I don't know if you have internal kind of security auditors, but for devs or for internal security auditors, like how do you look outside of the Sky ecosystem to hire, or how do you look at hiring?
Yeah, it's a good question. And that's something that's been in flux quite a bit. Up until half a year ago or so, we didn't really have that many development teams over at Sky. Or I should say it has fluctuated a lot, obviously, during like the real like DAO days where there was, really everything was done through like decentralized governance. There were more development teams. I would say that this like security culture and the security practices, but also like the hiring practices related to that have been pretty unique to these various teams. And there have been like, interactions between those teams so that there is this like overarching culture. It's mostly been just a matter of like hiring people that are already trusted, right? So from their own network or from other projects with a good track record. But we're now seeing that is not really scalable, especially if you need more people. And I think just in general, as the crypto space becomes more mature and is attracting more talent from outside of this like small OG bubble, it's something that's definitely it's become a bit more difficult. And what we're trying to codify and document some of those practices and principles in the atlas, so that it's no longer sitting in these brains of these handful of engineers, but it's something that's out there and you can easily like have people teach themselves. But there's this other initiative we call protocol security. It's basically this internal work stream where we have some people with an interesting profile of being like tech first, but also having good soft skills and being able to manage cross-functionally. They actually just go through the whole organization, but also zoom out and look around in the DeFi space and try to understand how we can improve and how we can scale on that front, and basically coming up with initiatives that improve the security practices and then try to implement those. So we have a roadmap for that. And it's like this continuous project where we try to add things to processes, but also solve problems that we're having on that front.
That's super interesting. What's kind of the purview of that protocol security team? Is it just code security or is it more?
I would say it's a bit broader. So, for example, we're now also looking at ways to make it, make the onboarding of new development teams more effective and less reliant on people and ad hoc calls, and maybe even having some like exercises and exams that they can go through. Another example is a Sky-wide OPSEC training for not only engineers, but also people that are on multisigs or that somehow manage infrastructure. That's been something that's, it's been very implicit for years because everyone at Sky was crypto native and we just generally expected everyone to manage it for themselves. And of course, things like GitHub repositories and the protocol itself, that was actually managed properly. But we've also brought in a lot of like non-crypto natives over the last 12 months. And those people are now, they have to sign multisig transactions. And that's one thing where we're now trying to coordinate that top down and make sure that there is a certain standard that's been implemented that we can also be certain of through exams, for example, making sure that people that are signers on multisig, they went through an exam to make sure that they can verify domain hashes, right? And then there's this other pretty new thing to Sky where we're looking at LLM-based auditing tools, not as a replacement for traditional code audits, but just figuring out like how can we integrate this into the development lifecycle, and just further improve and get like early feedback to engineers, even when they're still designing modules, right? So that hopefully these audits at the end of the cycle, they continue to return zero serious issues.
Yeah. No, that's super important. What you said on the OPSEC and like taking a test before you can sign a multi-sig transaction, that's super interesting and fascinating to me. Can you say more about kind of what some of those OPSEC measures are, or what's on that test?
Yeah. So what we ended up doing is we hired an external company to give us a bunch of trainings when it comes to OPSEC, and it was pretty broad, and it wasn't just about multisigs and crypto, but just in general, like working fully remote in an environment that's becoming more and more hostile and more dangerous, right? So making sure that, especially also the communication channels that people use, that also those are very well protected, and just making people aware of what good OPSEC looks like in general, from YubiKeys keys to like cold accounts, and and then of course being on a multisig, that's a very important one. That's also a little bit more involved because you can tell that as an industry, I think we've had some pretty rude awakenings the past 12 months on that front, and you can tell that the big exploits are moving away from like smart contracts being exploited towards like front ends being hacked, right, or DNS attacks, or indeed like you social engineer people so that they end up signing malicious actions in a multisig,
right?
And I think that tooling landscape is getting a lot better. I think obviously the SAFE team is doing a great job, and their front end is getting better and better, but still it's very involved, and it just. I think we need to take it serious, right? And make sure that, especially using a hardware wallet connected to a multisig, making sure that even in a complicated setup like that, you are able to verify every single hash that you see, and make sure that you do not sign it until you know 100% sure what you're doing. And that's typically one of those things that, because there's always like day-to-day work, there's always too much work. That's an initiative that you just need to like coordinate top down in like a separate work stream, and also find a way to enforce it, right? And we found that doing exams is the best way to do that.
Interesting. So you give internal members tests to make sure that they understand the fundamentals of signing a multi-sig transaction or whatever it is.
That's right. Yeah.
Very cool. What would you say is kind of the biggest area of focus on the security side for Sky?
I would say the existing requirements and processes that are in place when it comes to the internal reviews, the code audits, and then of course all these steps related to the governance process in Spellcrafting. I think they're solid, but I think we need to figure out how those scale, right? Because the plan for the upcoming year is to add more subdaos, right? More stars. And ultimately, we're going to run into bottlenecks because the process is very involved, and the amount of people that have the context and that are trusted to do the work is limited, and we're already pretty much at their limits. So we're basically finding ways to work even more with external companies and like trusted auditors that can help us be an additional check there. So basically scaling the number of individual security researchers that we're comfortable working with. There's of course, as I mentioned, making sure that we leverage the latest tooling out there, making sure that that's tightly integrated into all of our processes. But then we're also just right now looking at ways to refactor some of the modules that we use for things like that the stars use to allocate into yield opportunities, because that module has been designed about 2.5 years ago. By now, it's solid, right? It's Lindy. It has a lot of exposure, but after having these subdaos operate for a while, there's a lot of learnings. So we're now looking at ways to like improve that design so that it can work a little bit more efficiently, be less reliant on spells, especially for like smaller parameter changes, all the while not compromising on the checks and balances that we have today.
Yeah. Do you have like an internal philosophy around, obviously you prioritize security very strongly, but you're a company that has to earn revenue and get users and that sort of thing. Do you have an internal philosophy around balancing those things, like when to make a spell or when to upgrade a contract?
It's a good question. I think if I just look at where the project is going, there will be more subdaos. And I think these subdaos, they will need to have clarity with regards to what they can allocate into and what the rules are and what the incentives are, also the negative incentives. So there's this risk framework that's in place today, but that's continuously evolving and being built up so that these teams understand what to allocate into and like how much risk capital they need to have available as a way of hedging the risk of these particular allocations. That's very much in flux. But when it comes to like the code security, so far the culture has been, and I would really like to keep it that way, is to not compromise at all, right? So when it comes to hard requirements in terms of how many audits are required and what the result should be, that should never be compromised on. And if there's if something goes wrong and causes a delay, that just means that you use the next spell, right, in 2 weeks or in 4 weeks. But we're not going to compromise on those on those requirements in place. So that's the culture that we do have today, and that is what we're going to uphold even as we scale the organization.
Got it. Yeah, that was okay. That was going to be my next question, because obviously you guys have been really successful on the security side of things. And so, that culture that you just described it makes a lot of sense. But you have 4, I guess, subdaos that are announced this year. I think 4 more or something next year. Can is the plan to have all of those 8 subdaos have the same standards as like the core Sky protocol?
Ultimately, yes. Yeah. I'm saying ultimately, but the answer should just be plainly yes. Yeah. And what we've seen is that also for these teams, you can tell that it causes friction, because inherently these teams operate more like a startup than compared to Sky Core, right?
Sure.
They want to move faster. Their incentive is to allocate into yield opportunities, generate a spread that then ends up to the token holders of their star, right? Their subDAO. Yeah, it's being one of the early stars. It hasn't been easy for them, because they ended up like building up this framework together with us,
right? And
often being bottlenecked by the Sky Core side. But yeah, even in 6 months, we've already learned so much, and we've improved a lot, and we've started scaling in the right places. So I think the answer is an absolute yes, where the requirements will apply equally to all of these stars, and they will have to find creative ways to make sure that their code is as good as possible, right? So that if they submit it for audit, or if they submit a spell for review, for example, that there's not going to be any findings in there. And we've already seen that we have stars that contribute to figuring out the framework within Sky itself, but they're also just paying for pre-audits making sure that they can get some extra eyes on the code. And just do a bunch more iterations before they even submit it to SkyCore. So I think that in itself has been successful, where you have like these smaller teams moving faster, moving autonomously, but having very clear rules, but also incentives on how to operate, especially when it comes to code quality. And basically getting creative in how you can achieve those results, and basically getting better and better as an engineering team.
Right. So I guess speaking of getting creative, you talked a little bit about LLM or AI auditing. What do you think about it so far, and how are you experimenting with it?
Honestly, it's something that came to my attention quite recently. I know that this has been a thing, but I've always thought that it's not ready for the real deal yet, especially when it comes to like a more complicated protocol like Sky. But we've had one of our teams experiment with it, and they've had really fantastic results, and they have it like fully integrated in their workflow. So they gave me a demo a while back. I was blown away, and after thinking about it more, it's super obvious, right? I mean, all the code out there, it's all open source. Also, all the audit reports, also public open source, right? So it's just the perfect use case for an LLM. And the results so far have been astonishing, and we're now working on integrating such a tool throughout the whole organization. And at the same time, we're just trying to keep up with that space as well, because I can tell there's like many vendors. It's a very dynamic space, but it's very exciting to see. And it's just the cost of implementing such a tool compared to like the potential upside of not getting exploited is absolutely skewed in our favor, obviously.
Right.
But what I like even more about it is how it just completely influences and changes the workflow of an engineer, right? And we've already had the change so much, right? We have things like Claude AI that just completely changes or Claude Code, I should say, how an engineer works. But now you have these like really thorough, analyses of even a PR that just gives really deep feedback early on in the process, where you allow people to iterate before they even submit it for internal review. And I don't know, it's just very fascinating to me, and very compelling. One thing that does scare me about this kind of stuff is knowing that as these tools get more powerful, that also means that the malicious actors also get access to tools like that. So in that sense, it also feels like a bit of a race to make sure that whenever something like this surfaces, implemented ASAP. And then, that's why I'm happy that we have this protocol security workstream that's tasked with basically keeping up with that world and surfacing initiatives.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a pretty good endorsement of AI auditing. You know, the risk reward as you laid out is pretty good. Okay, it takes some time to incorporate into the workflow. Maybe there's some false positives, but at the end of the day, if it can stop a critical, or if it can find a critical, then that's pretty useful, especially earlier on in the development cycle.
Exactly. I would say it's too early to consider it like a full replacement of the more traditional audits. Let's see where it takes us, but for now it's just something that we add on top of what we already have.
Do you think it will replace human auditors at some point?
It's a really good question. My opinion, which might be a little controversial, when it comes to audits and like auditors, like there's so many auditing firms right now, and I think many of them are not great. So in that sense, I think if you're one of those protocols that just hires random auditing firms just so you can get towards this vanity metric of like 4 independent audits, 5 independent audits.
Yeah.
In that case, definitely yes. But I will say like there's like the best auditors in the space that have so much experience and have a certain way of thinking, I think it will be hard to replace those, because I think their thinking and their magic, it's not something that you can easily mine from audit reports, I think. Because a lot of the value that we get from auditors, they cannot be found in the audit reports, but they actually happen in like the discussions during an audit itself, right?
Right.
That's also where you actually get a lot of like knowledge sharing and feedback, right? So having an engineer participate in the audit of their own code and having these discussions with auditors, that is, I think, a very important aspect to doing audits. And it's not just about this final report acting as like a stamp of approval.
Yeah, makes sense. You mentioned working with a few more independent researchers potentially. If there's, an independent security researcher watching this, what's the best way for them to get on your radar?
It's a good question. I would say track record, obviously, right? That's the first thing we look at, like how senior are you? How many reviews have you already done? Have you participated in audit contests, for example? Did you make a name for yourself? And then the second thing is really just building up exposure to the Sky code base, right? We like to work with auditors that have prior experience with the code base. And yeah, the more experience a person has reviewing like Sky related repositories and interacting with Sky engineers, the more likely it is that we want to work with them. So it's a bit of a chicken egg problem.
Right.
And we're trying to solve that by working with the auditors that we're currently already working with and just making sure that they gradually add more people to the pool, have them shadow review, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. And if someone, you guys have a public bug bounty, I'm pretty sure if someone finds a really important issue in the public bug bounty, you might have a conversation with them.
For sure. Yeah. That's another nice funnel for hiring indeed.
What would you say is a contrarian opinion you have on the Web3 security space, or controversial? I think that AI auditing is almost there. Do you have any others?
Yeah, I think the one that I just mentioned, the fact that a security audit is not like any other security audit, right? I think at this point, given that the space is so saturated, I think it really comes down to which individual are you working with, right? And that is something I think many auditing firms have not been able to deliver on yet. I think in that sense that would be my answer. That there's a lot of auditors out there that are not they're not going to give you any security confidence apart from just having another independent audit report.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm too biased to comment on that as well, but that's a good, an interesting answer. I guess last question for you. What are you most excited about in the future for Sky?
Yeah, I'm generally optimistic about the future for stablecoins. I sometimes miss these like very optimistic and like ideological years of crypto when I just joined 2017, 18, where like the possibilities were endless and our imagination also was endless. I think we've all woken up to reality there. But when it comes to stablecoins, I think it's just such an obvious use case. And I think we're now also seeing a lot of acknowledgement all over the world there. And I really feel like with the space maturing and also regulatory clarity being created across the world, I feel like it's going to be a really, really cool year to like scale stablecoins as a product to more people. And I'm just really optimistic in terms of Sky being able to be like a very good product in that wide range of stablecoins that we'll see in a bunch of years. And obviously, I think Sky is unique because it's one of the only like decentralized stablecoins.
Right.
So you can make sure that the collateral basket that is collateralizing the stablecoins that you hold is managed by a diverse group of people with checks and balances and a proper governance process, where ultimately you're probably also going to get the best return on your stablecoins because there's less intermediaries.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to it. I think Sky is super well positioned, so it's going to be a fun year.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on, Deniz. Appreciate it.